We will be talking about the cosmological argument, as it's called. And you can see the title of the notes is The Universe. This is going to be called the Cosmological Argument. This is one of the great discoveries for Christianity, is early 20th century, when we discovered that the universe actually had a beginning, and it's scientifically proven. That forces all theories about the universe to be based upon a beginning. And what we're going to see tonight is anything that has a beginning needs a beginner. Things just don't begin for no reason whatsoever. So we're going to go through this kind of thoroughly tonight, and we should have some opportunity at the end to take any questions you may have. So let's open in a word of prayer and we'll jump right in. Father, it's in Jesus' name that we come to you. And Lord, as you encourage us to consider the heavens and the glory that is in them, Lord, that it's part of your speech to us. It's part of your revelation to us. And we want to examine it, Lord, and again, we want to see your fingerprints. We want to see that what you have made, you've left the beauty of your being behind, so that we could know that this is not randomness or accidental, but there's intent and purpose behind it all. So we thank you for this now in Jesus' name. Amen. I believe it's in Isaiah 45 that Isaiah writes, God created the earth to be inhabited. Now think about that. God created the earth to be inhabited. It doesn't say he created Mars or other planets or anything else. He created the earth. So there's point number one. He created the earth. Point number two is he created it for the purpose of it being inhabited. Because one thing, even before I got into apologetics, that I always marveled at was a simple fact that when I thought the Big Bang was a secular theory, I didn't realize how it was very much a theological theory, as you'll see tonight. I always wondered, when I thought it was a secular theory, how could, of all the planets in our solar system, how come the only one that got water was ours, and we got a major abundance of it? How come the only one that has an atmosphere is ours? How come the only one that has peas and carrots and potatoes is ours? You know, imagine if that stuff grew on other planets, but not this one. That would be quite a predicament for us. In fact, we wouldn't be here to talk about it. So everything that goes for life is here. None of it's on even the closest planet to us, Mars. It all came to this very one. And if we are just a result of a random explosion, you can't imagine a greater stroke of luck than every single element that requires life and the combinations of those elements end up here and nowhere else. So I think it'd be entirely silly to believe something like that. Now, what are the implications of what you believe about the beginning of the universe? What's the implications if you think there's a God behind it, or if you think nature could create itself? And I want you to know that that's the evolutionary argument, that nature created itself, that it has no creator, has nothing outside of it that acts upon it to create it, to bring it from non-existence to existence. And if that were the case, then we should see that all the time. We should see things come into existence all the time for no apparent reason whatsoever. But we know it violates the law of physics. And I think we covered this last week. What do we call a violation of the law of physics? It's a miracle. So everybody, secular or theistic, has to believe that the creation of the universe is indeed a miracle. Now we just have to see what's the source of that miracle. So the other implication of what you believe about the universe has to do with, do you think there's purpose in the universe? Is there meaning in this universe? Because if it is indeed chemical reaction, coincidence, luck, and all of that, then there's absolutely no overall purpose for you being here. There's no existential purpose for you being here. You can create your own little purposes all you want while you're alive and set these purposes for yourself, but overall, it doesn't mean anything to anybody else, and nor will it mean anything after you're gone. So there's really nothing to your existence whatsoever if the universe wasn't intentionally created. If it was intentionally created, then the one who intentionally created it has some intentions for you being here. Now you have purpose. Now there is meaning to your day. So It's a very, very important thing to know why you believe that there's a creator behind the universe. Now, something has to be eternal. This is just what the science tells us. You can't have absolutely nothing, total nothingness, and all of a sudden you have something. I'm going to give you a Latin term a little later, and I'll give it to you when we get there, but it's ex nihilo nihil fit, which means out of nothing, nothing can come. So if you have nothing, you'll always have nothing. If the universe blinked off for a millisecond and there was absolute positively nothingness in the entire universe for a millisecond, then necessarily there would always be nothing. Because once you have nothing, there's nothing to get it out of its nothingness. It'll have to stay nothing for all eternity. So once we discovered the Big Bang, once we understand that before the Big Bang there was absolute nothingness, now there's got to be something outside of this universe acting upon it to bring something out of nothing. And that's why the Big Bang became one of the great theistic discoveries ever. And you'll hear from atheists tonight. I'll quote some atheists for you tonight and get their words on this. All right, now, what people like to ask is this. They'll say, if God created the universe, they'll say, then who created God? And who created God? Now think about that. If I gave you an answer of who created God, what would your next question be? Well, who created that being? And if there was an answer for that, the question would be, well, who created that being? Now you're in something called an infinite regress. You're infinitely regressing into the past, and that's a logical fallacy. We're not allowed to infinitely regress into the past, especially when we discover that the universe had a beginning. That means there's a starting point. There's a point where you got to say, what created that beginning? What started that beginning? So, what we know about whatever created the universe is we have laws that guide us towards defining what's necessary about the cause of the universe. So when we look at the things that become necessary to be true about the cause of the universe, we see it ends up describing the God of our Bible perfectly. So let's move forward and see how that works out. All right. Now, here's a quote from Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said, "Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind." In other words, Albert Einstein saw that the two go together very well. Now, he began his career as an atheist, but his second law, his law of general relativity, his theory of general relativity brought him to theism, made him a believer in some sort of force out there. He didn't necessarily define the Christian God, but he knew something had to begin the universe. In 1916, Einstein didn't like that his theory of general relativity pointed to a definite beginning point of the universe, a beginning of all time, space, and matter. So keep this in mind. We talk about the beginning of the universe. We're talking about the beginning of time, the beginning of space, and the beginning of all matter. Okay? So Einstein literally called his own discovery irritating. It irritated him because he wasn't a believer in any sort of theistic being out there. Arthur Eddington, who's a British cosmologist in the days of Albert Einstein, he proved the theory of general relativity to be true mathematically. So that means it's no longer a theory, it's now a proven theorem, because he proved it mathematically. But he also didn't like the implications of what a beginning of the universe would mean theologically. He said, philosophically, the notion of the beginning to the present order of nature is repugnant to me. I would like to find a genuine loophole. See, this strikes at the atheist's core belief system. They know if the universe has a beginning, they got a lot of explaining to do of how it began without God. Russian mathematician Alexander Friedman, he exposed what's known today as a fudge factor in Einstein's work, because Einstein fudged his numbers so that the universe could still look eternal. One of the things Einstein did was divide by zero. And if you remember 4th or 5th grade math, you're not allowed to divide by zero. right? And Friedman discovered it, and he called it the Fudge Factor, and Einstein later confessed that it was the biggest regret of his entire career was fudging the numbers on his theory. But what I want you to know about that is this. Where the scientist takes great pride in just doing the experiments and giving the results. They want the laws of physics to speak for themselves, yet they get emotional over their findings, because if you're an atheist going into your work and it proves that there must be a being out there, you get emotional about that. And we see that today, that people's preconceived notions play into their conclusions, and that's not science. Science should have no emotion to it and should not let any preconceived notions determine outcomes in it. All right, now that this has been proven through Einstein's theory of general relativity that the universe had a beginning, there was a Dutch astronomer named William de Sitter who discovered that if Einstein's theory were true, the universe must be expanding. Once Einstein proved there was a beginning and a beginning point, now that point must be expanding outward. Well, in 1927, Edwin Hubble, and I'm sure that name is familiar to you for the Hubble telescope, Edwin Hubble in 1927 empirically observed that the universe is expanding because he would see a red shift in every observable galaxy. These red tints to the galaxies mean those galaxies are moving away from us. Okay, they look bluish if they're coming toward us. They look reddish if they're going away from us. In every observable galaxy, there's the red shift in those galaxies, meaning these are moving away from us, which is what would happen if the universe were expanding. Now, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. I want you to think that this astronomer discovered that the universe is expanding from a point of singularity. Now listen to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22, which was written 2,800 years before William de Sitter was born. Here's what Isaiah wrote. He says, "It is God who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in." Did you hear that? It says God stretches out the heavens like a curtain. That's a perfect analogy of stretching something out from a point of singularity outward, the exact description of our expanding universe. So Einstein must have had great satellite photography and instruments to know that in the 8th century BC, correct? No, that's proof of inspiration, that he's being spoken to by God about an expanding universe. All right. Now, this led Albert Einstein. He got invited by Edwin Hubble to go to Mount Wilson Observatory to look through Hubble's telescope to see the red shifts for himself, which proved that the universe was expanding. Einstein then gave this famous quote from that observatory. He said, "I want to know how God created the world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon, in this spectrum, or of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details." That's what it did to Albert Einstein, the discovery of the beginning of the universe. He says, now I want to know God's thoughts. Everything else besides God's thoughts are just details. What a glorious, glorious transformation that is. All right, now let's get into the cosmological argument. Okay, these are arguments from logic that are wonderful for debate. I would recommend to all of you that you look up a gentleman named William Lane Craig. He's a great debater, Christian debater. He's an apologetics professor at Biola University in California. He's one of my favorites to watch. And he always presents his cosmological argument to all the atheists that he debates. And I've never seen an atheist overcome these arguments, ever. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, the Four Horsemen, all of those guys, none of them overcome this argument. And William Lane Craig makes sure at the end he points that out. So let's learn this argument. Now, in your notes, you see that I gave you 3 points to the cosmological argument. Here's how these arguments go. You see, point number 1 says, everything that had a beginning had a cause, Point number 2 is the universe had a beginning. And then the conclusion then would be, therefore, the universe had a cause. If everything that had a beginning had a cause, and the universe we now know scientifically had a beginning, that means the universe had a cause. So the way these arguments work is quite simple, really. You give a couple of premises, which is number 1 and 2 are the 2 premises that this argument provides. And if you can prove those 2 premises to be true, then the conclusion naturally follows. Okay, it's reasonably expected all would agree with your conclusion if you can prove your 2 premises. So premise number 1 that we seek to prove tonight is this, that everything that had a beginning had a cause. And if we can prove that, then we'd have to prove that the universe had a beginning. And if we can prove that, then the conclusion would naturally follow that the universe has to have a cause. And once that's proven, then you'd have to ask what is necessary about the thing that caused the universe. There's things that are necessary scientifically for that thing. So we'll take a look at that as well. All right, let's look at premise number 1. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. This premise is proven by the law of physics called the Law of Causality. The Law of Causality. The Law of Causality, and you can write this in your blank if you'd like, simply states this: every effect has a cause. That's part 1 of it. Every effect has a cause. Part 2 of that law says this: and the effect cannot be greater than the cause. Can't have an effect that's greater than its source. Okay? So every effect has a cause, and the effect cannot be greater than the cause. So now the effect that we're studying tonight is the universe. That's the effect. So what has to be true of the cause? The cause has to be greater than the universe to create it. Okay? So what came into existence with the creation of the universe? All of time, space, and matter. So what is necessary for its cause? The thing that caused the universe has to be timeless or eternal. So now we have something eternal. Something has to be eternal to create something that has time involved in it. So we need a timeless cause. We also need a cause that's not restricted by space, because space wasn't created when the cause created space. So the cause has to be the cause has to be greater than space. And the cause cannot be made up of matter, because matter did not exist when the cause caused the universe. So it has to be something immaterial or spiritual, or being spirit. Now, does God fit these 3 definitions? Or is God still in the running for being an acceptable cause for the universe? Is he timeless? Yes. Is he spaceless? Yes. Is he matterless? Yes. So at this point, he certainly fits a cause. Now, here's the thing. The descriptions that Moses and Isaiah and the prophets give us of God, they had no idea about a cosmological argument or laws of causality and all of that. So the God that they describe, if they're describing him truthfully, would have to fit all these parameters of the necessary elements of the cause of the universe. And they so happen to do just so. All right, so the law of causality proves that everything that had a beginning had a cause. It's a law of physics. If that law were not true, then if you crashed your car into another car and the cops showed up, you could literally say, officer, that car came out of nowhere. And he'd have to agree with you. He'd have to say, that happens sometimes. Things can come out of nowhere because not everything needs a cause, type of thing. So if he's a true atheist or a true evolutionist, he'd have to agree with you. Do you think any cop would agree with you that the car came out of nowhere? Absolutely not. We know that these things don't happen. All right, premise number 2. We're going to go a little bit deeper and longer with this one. The universe had a beginning. So we proved premise 1 through a law of physics, the law of causality. Now we're going to prove premise number 2 that the universe had a beginning. And we're going to do it through 5 different categories here. And I had them spell an acronym for you. Okay, you see it there. The acronym is SURGE. Okay, SURGE. So, This comes from Dr. Norman Geisler. I don't know if any of you know him, but he writes wonderful apologetics books. I'd recommend you looking him up and studying his stuff. He's been a huge help for me over the years. All right, so surge. The S in surge stands for the second law of thermodynamics. So let's talk about that one first. The second law of thermodynamics. Now, the second law of thermodynamics simply states this, that the universe is running out of usable energy. All things run out of usable energy. That's the second law of thermodynamics. It's also known as the law of entropy. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the law of entropy. I want you to know that's the second law of thermodynamics, that all things lose usable energy over time. Okay, your car breaks down, the sun is burning itself out right now. All things lose usable energy. That's why we die. Our systems run out of usable energy and we pass away. So that's a law. Now, if the universe were eternal, if the universe has an infinite past, then there's no way it could have energy left in it today. There's no way the universe could survive an infinite amount of days in the past of burning its energy and it still have energy today. It's a philosophical impossibility. It's like saying your car has been running since eternity past and it has a finite gas tank, but it's not out of gas yet. It's impossible for it to burn that gas for an infinite amount of days in the past and still have gas in it today. So, the second law of thermodynamics would not allow the universe to be eternal. The other thing that describes the second law of thermodynamics is simply this. Entropy is the breaking down of matter over time. Things tend to fall apart. The universe is becoming less ordered all the time. Now, if the Big Bang were true and there was no miraculous, powerful force behind it like God, then there's no way that in this explosion of the Big Bang, which all explosions are utter chaos, correct? All the matter is chaotic when it explodes. But what happens to that chaotic matter over time? It became highly, highly ordered. It went from disorder to order. In fact, the universe is so ordered that all of our laws of physics are based upon the order that we see. If the universe were disordered, we'd have no physics. There'd be nothing to study about the physical world. But because we have physics, that tells us that the universe is predictable, it follows laws, and even though it started off in chaos and total disorder, over time it became highly ordered. That's the exact opposite of the law of entropy. Law of entropy says it goes from order to disorder. The universe went from disorder to order. So there's a violation of the law of physics. What do we call a violation of the law of physics? A miracle. If you have a miracle, you have to have what? A miracle worker. Without the miracle worker, everything will follow the laws of physics. All right. So that's the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy. Now, Norman Geisler that I just brought up, I want to give you a situation he was in, a debate he was in. He was arguing against a materialist. A materialist is just another name for an evolutionist, somebody that says nature can explain everything, okay? He's in a debate with a materialist, and Norman Geisler said to him, if everything is material, then what do you make of scientific theory, which is your profession? You're a scientific theorist. What do you make of scientific theory, which is not material? And the answer he got was, theory is magic. And Geisler said, well, what's your basis for saying theory is magic? And he says, I just have faith. So think of what his faith is in. He has faith that theory is magic and therefore doesn't have to follow the laws of physics. And he's willing to base his conclusions on magic like that. Very, very interesting. All right. Here's what Arthur Eddington, I quoted him earlier. Arthur Eddington, this is what he said about the importance of the second law of thermodynamics. He says it's so important for understanding the beginning of the universe and the fact that it has to have a cause. This is what he said. He says the law of the second law of thermodynamics holds, I think, the supreme position among the laws of nature. If someone points out to you that your pet theory of the universe is in disagreement with this equation or that equation, then so much for those equations. If it's found to be contradicted by observation, well, these experiments do bungle things sometimes. But if your theory is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. There's nothing for it but to collapse into deepest humiliation. So, our theory of the Big Bang, our theory of the second law of thermodynamics, and the fact that it's an utter miracle that that law was violated to create the universe points to a miracle worker. He's saying if you twist that second law around and say it could happen without anybody violating that law for it, it just was a violation on its own, he says your theory is going to fall into complete humiliation. And that's the evolutionist theory of the beginning of the universe. All right, so that's our S, our second law of thermodynamics. Our U is for the universe is expanding, which we talked about a little bit already. Now, if the universe is expanding from a point of singularity and it's expanding as time goes forward, if we could go backwards in time, what would the universe do? It would shrink back, correct? The further back in time we go. And if we went all the way back to the Big Bang itself, it would be this point of singularity. And it's that point of singularity that you want to point at and say, how did that get here? In that point of singularity is our universe, all of time, space, and matter. So how did it get here? What created it? And then how did it explode? What caused the explosion? Because remember, an explosion's an effect, so it needs a cause. And then the disorder of the explosion became order. So who monkeyed with the physics? Who played with the physics to allow them to actually work in reverse order there? It's a lot of explaining that only God can do those things, and yet we know that they happened. Now, I'm going to give you a very popular, outspoken atheist. His name is Dr. Peter Atkins. And when he was pressed with, how do you explain that everything came out of nothing? You don't believe in God, but you know about Einstein's theory of general relativity, you know the law of causality, you know we have a universe here, and you know we used to have nothing. So how do you explain that everything came out of nothing? Here's his explanation, and I want to see if we can pick it apart. He says this. He says, I imagine. Now, is that scientific already? Should that be considered a scientific argument when he starts with I imagine? Okay, that's how he starts. He says, I imagine a time before time when a swirling dust of mathematical points which recombine again and again and again and finally come by trial and error to form our space-time universe. Now, to a guy like William Lane Craig or some of our great Christian debaters, that's a softball pitch to hit a home run off of. You would love to hear somebody say that publicly. Why? First of all, he imagines, okay? So I can now posit in this debate that I believe in pink flying unicorns because I can imagine them. So is that enough to make them real? No. Secondly, he says, what am I imagining? A time before time. Listen, this isn't nitpicking at it. This is how arguments go. Can you have a time before time? If it's before time, the one thing you cannot ever have is time. So you cannot use the language of time before time. Okay? It's like saying, I want to tell you something that I did before I was ever born. No, you have to be born to do the stuff that you're doing. Time has to exist to have something happen in time. So he's in error for saying a time before time. And then he says, we're a swirling dust of mathematical points. Now, what's he trying to answer? How everything came out of nothing. And what's his nothing? Well, his first nothing is swirling dust. Is swirling dust nothing? No, swirling dust is something. And how about mathematical points? Are they nothing? No, they are something. So he uses two somethings to describe his nothing in this argument. And these mathematical points are recombining again and again until they come by trial and error to form our space-time universe. So if he's saying by trial and error, if mathematical points can form over and over again until they come up with the physics of our universe, that means there's order within the math. And if you get the order right, you're going to have a universe. Well, if there was nothing before the math, then how did it get so highly ordered? Who ordered it? How do you just have, with no explanation, not just dust, but highly ordered math and physics? That's what they have to rely upon. All right. So the problems that I stated with Atkin's theory is simply this. Problem number one, and this is always the most important thing to recognize in these arguments, he gives no scientific proof whatsoever. A lot of times people get caught up in the argument without realizing he didn't even present scientific proof. He just said, I imagine that this could have happened. So problem number one with this theory is there's no scientific proof whatsoever for it. Problem number two, mathematical points are not nothing, they're something, yet he's using them to represent as nothing. Problem three, even if it were true, mathematical points are worthless for forming life. How do mathematical points make things go from non-living to living? Just like the problem the evolutionist has today with chemicals. They think we are all in a chemical soup and those chemicals form just perfectly to form life. We've never seen chemicals form to become life. They never cross the bridge from non-living to living. I call it the Frosty the Snowman problem. They need a magic hat. They don't have a magic hat to get from non-living to living. Clearly at the Big Bang, there was no life whatsoever. Now our planet is teeming with life. You can look underwater and see all kinds of life. You can look up in the air and see all kinds of life. And certainly on our land, there's all sorts of varieties of life everywhere. And there is nowhere else on any planet that we've ever seen because God formed the earth to be inhabited. Isaiah 45. All right. Or it might be Psalm 45. I'm not sure which. But anyways, it's in there. It's near the middle somewhere if you're looking for it. All right. All right. That's Peter Atkins. Here's how Anthony Kenny, he's a British author, Anthony Kenny, here's how he described the atheists' descriptions of the Big Bang. This British author, his description, and Mike, I'm going to wait for you. If you can go to slide 42, if you hear me, Mike, they can read along with me. Slide number 42. Should be right after 41. There we go. All right, beautiful. Thank you, Mike. All right, there we go. All right, so Anthony Kenny, British author who described the atheistic theory well, he said this: according to the Big Bang theory, the whole matter of the universe began to exist at a particular time in the remote past. A proponent of such a theory, at least if he's an atheist, must believe that the matter of the universe came from nothing and by nothing. This leaves those who adhere to this theory with no reason for doing so. All right, so all the matter of the universe had to come from nothing and by nothing. It had no cause for it and no source for it whatsoever. That's what the atheist has to believe. That at first there was absolutely nothing, and then that nothing exploded into absolutely everything. Okay? And there's no way around it. In fact, when I see the atheist pressed on that point, the only answer I've ever heard that's been published and everything is this. They'll say, give us the first miracle, and then we'll explain all the rest. And I would say to them, I'll give you the first miracle as soon as you give me a miracle worker. Because the miracle is an effect. It needs a cause. I'm only following the laws of physics here. Okay? All right. Okay, so the R on surge is where we're at. The R on surge is for the radiation from the Big Bang. Now, if there was this huge cosmic explosion sometime in the past, you'd imagine there'd be a trace of radiation out there. Mike, this would be a good one to show too on 43. Slide 43 would be good to show. So there should be some radiation out there. Check this out now. In 1965, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson discovered the cosmic background radiation from the Big Bang explosion. They actually put their eyeballs on this radiation. It was discovered by accident when their antenna, oops, I just unplugged. Sorry, I stepped on my cord and unplugged my audio. All right, I'm back. Okay, now, discovered by accident when their antenna at Bell Labs in New Jersey detected some strange radiation coming from all directions. They thought it was from the bird droppings on the antenna, but when they cleaned it off, the radiation remained and was still coming from all directions. Usually radiation will come from one direction. This radiation was coming from all directions. They both won Nobel Prizes for this discovery because it was the radiation was the afterglow of the Big Bang. It was the afterglow of the actual Big Bang. And they won Nobel Prizes for this discovery. It's hugely important. Next slide, Mike. So Robert Jastrow. Robert Jastrow is a guy I really, really like. He's a scientist and an author, and he's not a Christian or a Jew, or he's an agnostic. He doesn't know if there's a God or not. And why I like him is because he kind of keeps score in the debate. He'll tell when the Christian wins a point, he'll say, listen, the Christian's got you on that one. If the atheist does, he'll say, hey, the atheist has got you on that one. He's very fair in balancing it out. And he wrote a book called God and the Astronomers, because he concluded through all of his weighing the scales that the Christian has the better argument for the beginning of the universe. So anyways, CRB stands for Cosmic Radiation Background. That laid to rest any lingering doubts that the universe had a beginning. Here's what Robert Jastrow said. No other explanation other than the Big Bang has been found for the fireball radiation. The clincher, which has convinced almost every last doubting Thomas, is that the radiation discovered by Penzias and Wilson has exactly the pattern of wavelengths expected for the light and heat produced in a great explosion. Supporters of the steady state theory is the people that think the universe is eternal. That's called the steady state theory. So supporters of the steady state theory have desperately tried to find an alternative explanation, but they have failed. At the present time, the Big Bang theory has no competitors. So I don't want you to be afraid of Big Bang. I remember when the comedy show came out, The Big Bang Theory. I thought, oh great, here goes all the evolutionists. But it's really, the Big Bang is Genesis 1 explained mathematically. Genesis 1 in our Bible is the Big Bang explained theologically. You want a theological look at the Big Bang, you read Genesis 1. You want a scientific look at the Big Bang, you look at Einstein's theory of general relativity and all this other science that we have here. All right, very good. Okay, the G of surge stands for galaxy seeds. So the next logical phase of the cosmic radiation background that we found was that there should be temperature variations in that radiation. These temperature variations of hotter areas and cooler areas form ripples in the radiation. And these ripples, as they cool, they'll be pulled together. The cooler areas will be pulled together through gravity, and that's what forms galaxies. So we call these the galaxy seeds, or these ripples in the radiation, these temperature variations in the radiation, where the cooler temperatures get pulled together by gravity and they form our galaxies. So in 1989, slide 46, Mike. Slide 46. So in 1989, NASA launched a $200 million satellite called COBE, which stands for Cosmic Background Explorer. COBE found the ripples, and scientists were amazed at their precision. Okay, so here's the precision of the ripples, and I want you to consider this because it'll play out in some understanding in a little while as well. The ripples, which are temperature variations, show the explosion and expansion of the universe was precisely tweaked to cause just enough matter to congregate to allow galaxy formation, but not enough to allow the universe to clap back on itself. Any slight variation one way or the other, and none of us will be here to talk about it. So what this is showing is this. When these ripples get caught up in gravity and come together, it matters how precisely the speed of that happening happens. Why? If it happens too fast, then our Milky Way that we live in would not be life permitting at all. It would happen too fast. It'd be a heat event, and there'd be way too much heat for us to ever survive. If it happens too slow, then it'll never actually come together. We'll never actually have a galaxy come together. So how precise is it? Well, the ripples COBE found are so exact down to 1 part in 100,000 that astronomer George Smoot, who led the expedition, called them the machining marks of the creation of the universe, and he called them the fingerprints of the maker. He called these ripples in the radiation that form the galaxies at this precise 1 in 100,000 odds of happening, this precise speed. He says these are the fingerprints of the maker, he called the galaxy seeds. There's no way it could happen without guidance, so he calls it, this is the fingerprints of the maker. And then he said this, if you're religious, this is like looking at God. And that comment made newspapers all over the world. He says, when we found these ripples in the radiation of the universe, he says, if you're religious, this is like looking at God. Astrophysicist Michael Turner said, the significance of this discovery cannot be overstated. They have found the holy grail of cosmology, these galaxy seeds. And here's probably a familiar name to you, Cambridge astronomer, the late atheist Stephen Hawking. He agreed, and he said this may be the most important discovery of the century, if not of all time. And it's a discovery that weighs heavily, heavily in our favor. George Smoot, that I quoted earlier, called these ripples the seeds of the galaxy, since they give us a picture how galaxies are formed. All right, so we had our S, which is the second law of thermodynamics. We had our U, that the universe is expanding. We had our R, the discovery of the radiation background. We had our G, the discovery of the galaxy seeds. And now we have our E, which we talked about a little already, which is Einstein's theory of general relativity. Einstein's theory of general relativity. So let's look at this. Einstein's theory, through that Russian mathematician, has been verified to 5 decimal places. It's accurate within 5 decimal places, which means it's no longer really a theory. It's now a mathematical formula, so we know it's mathematically sound. And it demands a beginning for all time, space, and matter. But it also demonstrates this, that time, space, and matter are correlative. They're interdependent. That means time could not have formed without space, and time and space cannot form without matter. They have to all come into existence at once. And as, if I can quote Kent Hovind from memory, which maybe I can, maybe I can't, we're going to find out together in a second. He said this about the codependence of time, space, and matter. He says, if you had matter and no space, where would you put it? Or if you had matter without time, when would you put it there? Type of thing. You have to have time, space, and matter come into existence at the same precise moment, or none of them come into existence, okay? And that's what Einstein's theory demonstrated. Not only that time, space, and matter were created through the Big Bang, but that they're correlative and interdependent with one another. Can't have one without the other. His theory of general relativity allowed the other things to be the pieces of the puzzle that give us the whole beginning of the universe. That the universe is expanding, makes sense of the radiation afterglow, which helps us make sense of the galaxy seeds and the galaxy formations, therefore. So the conclusion of these 5 lines of evidence that give you the acronym SURGE, if you add Einstein's theory of general relativity, if you add that to the second law of thermodynamics, to the fact that the universe is expanding, to the fact that we found the radiation from the Big Bang, that we can actually observe the galaxy seed formations, then you have powerful scientific proof that the universe had a beginning. Now, that was a lot, because about a half an hour ago I said, here's premise 2, the universe had a beginning, now let's prove it. All that surge just proved that second premise. What was our first premise? Everything that has a beginning has a cause. How's that proven through physics? The law of causality, correct? It's also known as the law of cause and effect. So we have the law of cause and effect proving premise 1. We have the SURGE acronym proving premise 2. And then what was the conclusion that would naturally follow? That the universe has a cause. The universe has a cause. So now that it has a cause, the question becomes, what caused the universe? Now, what did I say is necessary for this cause, based on the law of causality. The effect cannot be greater than the cause. So whatever caused the universe has to be greater than the universe. Cannot be subjected to time. He must be eternal. So when people say, well, if God created the universe, then who created God? They don't understand these physics. These physics demand something be eternal. Okay, to create time, something has to be outside of time, which is the exact definition of something that's eternal. So it's physically, scientifically necessary that something's eternal, and science has eliminated the universe as a possibility. So where do you go if it can't be the universe that created itself, something outside the universe? Well, Richard Dawkins and others have attempted to use aliens as the explanation. I want you to know this. Richard Dawkins never says, when asked how life began, he'll never say through Darwinian evolution. He knows the science will not support that. What Richard Dawkins says now, and he's been saying it for quite a while now, is that he believes that aliens seeded life on our planet. And that those aliens would have had to come from some higher civilization of aliens, which would have had to come from a higher civilization of aliens, which would have had to come from a higher civilization of aliens. What is that? That's not allowed. Infinite regress. Okay? He enters into an infinite regress, which does not follow the laws of logic, especially in a finite universe. You can't do that. So, earlier I quoted Arthur Eddington, who said that the idea that the universe had a beginning was repugnant to him. Well, after all of this, he says this: the beginning of the universe seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look upon it as frankly supernatural. So here's a strong skeptic who doesn't believe in God saying you have tons of difficulties in explaining the beginning of the universe unless you see it as supernatural. Okay? And how do you think the naturalists feel about that? They don't believe in anything supernatural. Arno Penzias, the co-discoverer of the radiation background, said this: the steady state theory, and what's that again? That's the belief that the universe is eternal. The steady state theory turned out to be so ugly that people dismissed it. The easiest way to fit the observations with the least number of parameters was one in which the universe was created out of nothing in an instant and continues to expand. Robert Wilson, the other discoverer, said, I philosophically liked the steady state, and clearly I had to give it up. Okay, so these are the guys that discovered this, said you can't believe in an eternal universe anymore. Science writer Fred Hereen. I'm on 55, Mike. Why don't you have him join here? Slide 55. There we go. Science writer Fred Hereen said this: when he was asked if the Big Bang evidence is indicative of a creator, he said, certainly there was something that set it all off. Certainly if you're religious, I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match with Genesis. Did you hear that? Okay, I want you to know that the Big Bang is entirely compatible with Genesis. God did not say to Moses, hey, E equals mc squared. That's not how he explained the beginning of the universe to him. He said, in the beginning I created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and then I said, let there be light, and the light appeared. That's how he tells it to Moses. What are these guys discovering? They're discovering all the mathematics behind it, and all the necessary components behind it, and it's all pointing one gigantic finger towards God, that it has to be God. George Smoot, this is the third time I've quoted him. He says, there's no doubt that a parallel exists. This is the next slide. There's no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. There's no question that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. All right. So that's just about an hour. I guess I'll quickly go through the next slide, Mike, if you want to pull up the next one in the last few minutes before I take some questions. here's the three major attempts to avoid God being the cause of the universe. Okay, so now that it's established the universe is an effect and it has to have a cause, and that God fits the necessary components of that cause, these are the three published theories of why maybe it doesn't have to be God. The first one's called the cosmic rebound theory. Okay, next slide. This theory suggests that the universe has been expanding and contracting forever. So it's not just one big bang that we're in. It's saying there was a big bang, and then gravity caught up with all the matter and pulled it back in, and there's a giant crunch of the universe, and it became a point of singularity again, and then that exploded again and caused a great expansion, and then gravity caught it at some point and put it back into a giant crunch, and it's just been expanding, contracting over and over again for all eternity. Okay? Now there's many, many problems with this theory, and it's fallen out of favor because of all these problems. The first problem is the problem they always have. There's no evidence for it. There's zero evidence that that's ever happened. In fact, there's evidence against it thanks to Kobe, the cosmic background explorer. Kobe found that the speed of the expansion of the universe is precise to 1 part in 100,000, that it'll never contract on itself, nor is it so fast that galaxies can't form. It's the precise exact speed it needs to be. Last point down there says it would require an infinite amount of Big Bangs to be correct. So now, you can go to the next slide. The problem with an infinite amount of Big Bangs is that if there's an infinite amount of Big Bangs, that's harder to explain mathematically and through physics than one Big Bang. Because if one Big Bang is such a miracle, the last thing you want to do with something that has such great odds against it is say that that very rare event has happened many, 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 many times. That just increases the odds against it. If one Big Bang is highly unlikely without God, 2 are twice as unlikely, 3 are 3 times as unlikely, an infinite amount is infinitely more unlikely to have happened. The other major problem with it is this. What about the second law of thermodynamics? The second law of thermodynamics says all systems are losing usable energy. So an infinite amount of Big Bangs would always be losing energy through each successive Big Bang. And if they've been happening from an eternity past, there's no way they have any energy left in them today for this universe. You can't be doing something from an eternal past that loses energy and still have energy in the present day. And if you've heard me say that a couple times now, and this is what's called a different kind of cosmological argument. It's called the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Let me briefly explain that if I could. It's a philosophical version of it. And it simply says this, that if there's an infinite amount of days in the past, if the universe is eternal, that means there's been an infinite amount of days in our past. But if there's an infinite amount of days in our past, we could never arrive at today. Why? Because it's impossible to complete an infinite set. You'd have to complete an infinite set of days to get to today. And it's impossible to complete an infinite set. So we have a massive contradiction in the thought of having an eternal universe. It literally contradicts itself in its logic because of what had to have happened to get to today, which is the completion of an infinite amount of days, which you can't ever have. So it doesn't work philosophically, and we've seen tonight it doesn't work scientifically as well. So you can see there in 2003, Charles Bennett of NASA said the readings from the space probe indicated that the universe will go on expanding forever. He said the universe will expand forever. It will not turn back on itself and collapse into a great crunch. Astronomers have additionally found that the universe's expansion rate is actually increasing. Okay, next slide. Third problem, even if the universe had enough matter to contract on itself, the cosmic rebound theory contradicts the second law of thermodynamics because the theory falsely assumes that no energy will be lost and each contraction is an explosion. I covered that just a moment ago. All right, so a universe continually expanding and contracting and exploding over and over again would have fizzled out a long time ago. Finally, an infinite amount of bangs is impossible, and even if it were a finite number of bangs, it's impossible to account for the first one. How do you account for the first one? You'd be right into the area we covered tonight. It needs a cause for it, and that cause has to be greater than time, space, and matter. So there's really nowhere to go with these explanations with the cosmic rebound theory. So the second one is called imaginary time. This was proposed by Stephen Hawking to avoid the obvious scientific conclusions that demonstrate a beginning of all time, space, and matter. And here's the whole theory. You ready? He said, hey, in real time, the universe has a beginning, but maybe there's imaginary time. Folks, that's the theory. Sounds like a Dr. Seuss book a little bit. Okay, he says maybe there's imaginary time. Well, when you start your scientific theory with maybe, you're definitely not doing science, are you? Okay. So anyways, that's the imaginary time theory, saying, hey, in real time, I acknowledge the universe had a beginning, but maybe there's some other form of time called imaginary time, and maybe that's how it started. Okay, go with that if you'd like. All right, next slide. Imaginary time is indeed imaginary, yes. The uncertainty principle, this one's the hardest to follow, but it's only a couple slides long. Let's see if we can answer it here. So what Heisenberg did is he tried to create doubt about the law of causality. He knows if the law of causality stays intact, then it could crumble the whole cosmological argument. So he's going to attack the law of causality. Even though the law of causality is the fundamental law of all science. So if he's successful in tearing down the law of causality, then nobody can do science whatsoever, because all of science is an observation of cause and effect. All of science is an observation of cause and effect. If he destroys this law, then there are no more scientists, there's no more science classes, there's nothing. But so he tried to attack it, and here's what he did. So he came up with his Heisenberg's uncertainty principle regarding subatomic particles. This principle describes our inability to simultaneously predict the location and speed of subatomic particles called electrons. So atheists assert that if causality at the subatomic level isn't necessary, then maybe causality of the entire universe isn't necessary either. So let me just explain what he's saying here. If you look at an electron, or if you look at an atom, electrons will disappear and appear at different parts of that atom, and we don't know why. We don't know why they choose to go where they go. We don't know why they choose to move at all. We don't know what's moving these electrons around the atom. So Heisenberg said, because of that uncertainty of the cause of that, maybe it doesn't have a cause. And so therefore, maybe that applies to the universe. Well, here's the problems with it. Next slide. The problems with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is that it confuses causality with predictability. The only thing that is shown through that example of the electron is that we can't predict these movements. It doesn't mean they don't have a cause. It just means we can't predict where they're going or why they're going. In fact, just because we can't predict something doesn't mean it has no cause. Go to the next slide, Mike. In fact, there's a dynamic that speaks to this, and it has to do with the fact that our very observation of the electron may be the cause. The fact that we put it under a microscope may be causing these movements that we can't explain. It's much like a person studying a beehive. You can't really know what's going on inside a beehive because as soon as you put a camera in there or observe it in any way, you're causing the movement. You're causing the stuff the bees are doing to do it because you've disturbed the hive. So you don't know without disturbing the hive what they were really up to before that. Same with the electron. It may be your very disturbance of the electron that's causing these movements that we can't explain. But it doesn't mean they're not caused. It just means they're not predictable. Okay? I hope I didn't maul that too bad. And if I did, you can have your money back. All right. All right, so the conclusion of the uncertainty principle. Quantum theorists acknowledge that our inability to predict the speed and location of the movements of electrons is likely because our very attempts at observing them is the cause of their unpredictable movements. We must stir them up to observe them, much like a beekeeper putting his head in a beehive. All right. And so we have learned, next slide, we have learned that no atheistic theory can refute either premise of the cosmological argument. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe needs a cause. And I'll finish with a couple quotes from Robert Jastrow. They can read along. Next slide. So Robert Jastrow, and this is where his honesty and his transparency comes in. He says, theologians, okay, that's us, theologians are generally delighted with the proof that the universe had a beginning, but astronomers are curiously upset. Their reactions provide an interesting demonstration of the response of the scientific mind, which is supposedly a very objective mind, when evidence uncovered by science itself leads to a conflict with, now listen to this, the articles of faith in our profession. Robert Jastrow, the scientist, says we have articles of faith in our profession, things we have to believe without proof in order to give the conclusions we give. That's a massive confession there. Next slide. It turns out, this is still Jastrow, it turns out that the scientist behaves the way the rest of us do when our beliefs are in conflict with the evidence. We become irritated, we pretend the conflict does not exist, or we paper it over with meaningless phrases. Next slide. When Jastrow is talking about the fact that Einstein was upset over the implications of his theory of general relativity, Jastrow said, this is curiously emotional language for a discussion on mathematical formulas. Who gets emotional about math? Can you imagine your math teacher doing a formula, getting the answer and going, oh, I can't believe that. That's just terrible. Emotion has no part in math or science. I suppose that the idea of a beginning in time annoyed Einstein because of its theological implications. Next slide. More on Robert Jastrow. He says there's a kind of religion in science, like every effect must have its cause, there is no first cause. This religious faith of the scientist is violated by the discovery that the world had a beginning under conditions in which the known laws of physics are not valid, that's a miracle, and is a product of forces or circumstances that we cannot discover. When that happens, the scientist has lost control. Next slide. If he really examined the implications, he'd be traumatized. As usual, when faced with trauma, the mind reacts by ignoring the implications. In science, this is known as refusing to speculate or trivializing the origin of the world by calling it the Big Bang, as if the universe were a firecracker. So he's saying the atheistic world called the universe the Big Bang theory, because otherwise they would simply call it Genesis 1. So they call it the Big Bang to make it look like a giant firecracker and not point to the Bible with it. All right, and looks like one more slide will do for the night. Next slide, we'll stop here. So the evidence shows clearly that time, space, and matter all had a beginning. This demands a cause for it. The cause must be something or someone outside of time, space, and matter. In other words, it has to be an eternal cause. Actually, next slide. Meaningless phrases and refusing to speculate is how they avoid the obvious conclusions. That becomes a matter of the scientist's will, not his mind. It's what he wants, not what he's observing. The evidence is objective. The disbelieving scientists are not objective. All right. And that is indeed where we're going to finish tonight. Okay, Michael.
Sure. We have a question here that says, I believe you said Dawkins claims that aliens seeded the Earth. How should we address the subject of aliens?
I use tremendous amounts of laughter. You can do the same if you'd like. The thing with aliens is this. The theory is called direct panspermia, directed panspermia. So in case you come across that term, you know what they're getting at. They should call it alien seeding life on the Earth, but it sounds so ridiculous, they call it directed panspermia. Directed simply means intentional, something intentional about it. Pan means all. Sperm, of course, means seed. So it's saying all life was seeded intentionally by other civilizations on the Earth, which Richard Dawkins would say came from, that civilization would have had to come from a higher civilization, which would have had to come from a higher one. So my question for Richard Dawkins, if I ever get to meet him, is who's got the seeds today? Are we the last civilization ever? I've never heard of anybody claiming to have the seeds that we got to go to another planet and seed life on there. So why is it stopping with us? Would be my first question for him. So how do we address the alien thing? Well, do I know if there's alien life out there or not? No. Am I pretty sure there's not? Yes. Why am I pretty sure? I'm taking up all your questions as well. I'm pretty sure there's not because simply this. It's very difficult for a 747 to fly from New York to Fort Lauderdale without thousands of people putting their eyeballs on it. So I don't know why a UFO could literally come from another galaxy into our planet, and the only guy that sees it is the guy in New Mexico with the fuzzy camera. And he never gets a good picture of it. So that just doesn't sit logically with me. That you don't have entire states or nations, multiple nations, all reporting at the same time that they see this thing entering into our atmosphere type of thing and coming down to us. And then, as much as I'll have to say, much as I today despise reporters, the one good thing about reporters is this. If there's something to discover, like aliens, they will stop at nothing to uncover that story. Nothing. It is their entire career and reputation to come up with something fantastic. And they will stop at absolutely nothing to uncover it. And none of them are pursuing this story. That tells me something as well. Now, is that conclusive, open and shut case? No. But is the case lid pretty close to being tightly shut? To me, yes. I just can't see something so fantastic and global being so private and unknown by so many. So this is how I see it. So I don't give much credibility to alien life. If there are aliens, then I believe Jesus Christ is their God, and maybe they never sinned in their garden and they're doing great, or maybe they're needing redemption. I don't think anything changes in our Bible, whether there's alien life or not. I just don't believe personally that there is.
Great, thank you, Pastor Bill. We have the simple question of how do Christians go about explaining dinosaurs?
I say they're big. I say they're dangerous. But anyway, I mess with teenagers all the time, so excuse me. But explaining dinosaurs is simple. If they indeed existed, I would expect them to be in our Bible. And guess what? They're in our Bible. And two things I'll say about dinosaurs. Number one, when God wanted to prove to Job exactly who he was, he challenged him on who made the dinosaurs. He describes beasts that the only description we've ever seen on our planet of those descriptions are like brontosauruses. He'll say, who made the behemoth who can stand in a raging river without budging? Do you know of any creature that could do that? Has a tail like a cedar tree. So don't say hippopotamus or rhinoceros, because their tail is not like a cedar tree. It says that their flesh, your arrows can't penetrate their flesh, so they're scaly animals and things like that. So he describes things that can only be described as dinosaurs, and Job does not say, what in the heck are you talking about? God, I've never seen such a thing. He clearly has a reference point for what God is referring to there. Now, that's biblical. Now, what's scientific is this. We have a couple dozen dinosaur fossil bones that have either soft tissue on them or red blood cells in them. Neither soft tissue nor red blood cells, their half-life is about 500,000 years. Now, we may not believe life is even 500,000 years old, but what does the evolutionist say about dinosaurs? 65 million years ago. Well, these dinosaur bones that we have with red blood cells or soft tissue on them say these ones are less than 500,000 years old. It's nowhere near their 65 million years ago. So we know that timeline is challenged by the red blood cells and the soft tissue that we find in these dinosaur bones. So when you talk about timeline, when you talk about dating methods and all of that, they all have serious presuppositions. They're presupposing certain conditions to be true to come up with their dates. And if those preconditions turn out not to be true, then their dates are completely random dates. And a lot of those presuppositions aren't held in very high regard today. It's just that when every museum has gone by them for the last 100 years, every PBS special, every Discovery Channel special is all based on that ancient data, and they all use the term millions of years all the time. People grow up brainwashed towards that. So our universities, I'm not a fan of them at all anymore. It used to just be because of things like evolution, but now it has to do with entire worldviews are being poisoned in the university system. But that's all they teach. It's all that's being taught there. We kick God out of the public institution. So you cannot teach what I taught tonight in a public institution. That means publicly the United States of America is teaching that things are possible without God. And no, let me just say this boldly. No public institution can overcome the cosmological argument or the teleological argument that you're going to learn later, or the biological evolution I'm going to give you before these 8 weeks are over. None of them can overcome that. So that's why I want to present this stuff to as many people as possible. God has left his fingerprints, not only his fingerprints on how he created, but he also eliminated all of the man-made naturalistic theories of life in the universe. He's eliminated them through physics and science and observation and all of that. So, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Pastor Bill. On the topic of dating, can you explain basically carbon dating and the argument against it?
Yeah, the simple argument against carbon dating is it's on the presupposition that the atmosphere has precisely the same amount of carbon today as it had always. It always had the same amount of carbon in it. That's necessary for carbon dating to be accurate. Now, this is the main reason why naturalists will not believe in a global flood. They will not believe in a global flood because that would change the atmospheric conditions, certainly. It would certainly change the atmospheric conditions. So they are called uniformitarianists. That means they think everything's been uniform for all of Earth's history, that there's been no cataclysmic events that would change the makeup of the atmosphere at all. So they have to deny a global flood with all their might because that would certainly change the atmospheric conditions, which means you can't use carbon dating to accurately date things anymore. We are called catastrophists. We believe there was a catastrophe that changed the fundamental layout of our atmosphere. And that could be one of our weeks. We have 4 weeks left. We could simply talk about the evidence of a global flood, if you'd like. I would like to get the biological proof that Darwinian evolution is not scientifically viable. I'd like to cover the teleological argument, which is the argument from design that all of life is so finely tuned that it would be way beyond a miracle for all these things necessary for life to all happen for us to be here. But I can give you a quote from Richard Dawkins where he just keeps saying, we just get a little luck and a little luck and a little luck. He sounds like a Paul McCartney song with a little luck all the time. Okay. So I want to do that. I want to do that. I could probably work in the fossil record, and with the fossil record, work in the geological columns that are laid out all over our globe have the exact appearance of being laid out instantaneously. They say these columns were laid out over millions of years. Think of the Grand Canyon. They'll say all the different color levels were millions of years of being laid out, where we say it happened in 1 year, the year of the flood. And the evidence that we're right and they're wrong is that if you have a layer and it takes millions of years for the next layer to be laid out on top of it, there's going to be massive amounts of erosion in between these layers. You just can't have a rock layer with no erosion that's been sitting there for millions of years. And there's little to no erosion in between these layers in the Grand Canyon. It's evidence of a global flood. Another huge problem is that you have marine fossils in the upper levels of the Grand Canyon and in mountains. So now you need an explanation of how you have marine fossils in mountains when a fossil has to be killed instantaneously and buried instantaneously to fossilize. So fossils that we find are violent deaths. If an animal just dies and falls to the ground and dies, it's not going to be a fossil. It's just going to rot away and its bones are just going to sit above ground. It has to be buried in sediment to fossilize. So that means every fossil we see, the best explanation for it is that it died in a global flood. Now, I just want you guys to think about all the dinosaur fossils that we've seen. Never mind the museums, because they set those bones up. These are bones they find all over the place, and they put them together to look like one. So those are very much manufactured to look the way they want them to look. But when we actually find a fossil with an entire miniature dinosaur, or even bigger dinosaurs in them, do you notice how they're all looking up? They're all looking up. Did you guys notice that? Okay. Lydia recognizes that. I don't know about anybody else. All right. Why would all of these fossils be looking up? They're gasping for air, folks. They're drowning. That's what happens when you drown in a flood. And we have all these dinosaur fossils, and not just dinosaur, but all sorts of animal fossils looking up in the air. What is that? Okay? So anyways, I pretty much just did that class. So we'll see how it plays out. I believe this is week 4, so we have 4 more weeks of fun coming. And hopefully this is helpful to you guys.
Yes, and we're giving messages of encouragement around interest in the flood explanation and the evidence bill. So we're getting some encouragement there.
Okay.
So here's a question for you. Is the Wheeler-DeWitt equation part of the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle explanation?
Not that I've ever read together. I haven't read them together. But the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is not something that I've literally gone to libraries to check out and read. I got what I wanted out of it. And honestly, it's just not one of the areas that I dive deep into. So if there is a connection, I just haven't gone deep enough to see it.
Excellent. So we have a question from the book of Genesis that has to do with the original sin when Eve ate from the apple. Do you believe in the concept that Adam saw her falling into sin and the romantic idea that he decided to sin to exit eternity and enter into a finite world along with her?
Do I believe that was his motivation?
Yeah.
It's really hard to know the heart of a guy that lived so long ago. But what I believe about that is this. I believe that Adam's behavior was actually drawing a contrast to Jesus' behavior. Because whether it was 5 seconds or 5 minutes, there was a brief period of time where the woman had fallen into sin and had the death sentence upon her, and yet Adam was innocent and eternal still. And what should Adam have done before he ate that fruit? I don't think he was like, hey, if you're going to die, I'm going to die with you. I think it's setting up a contrast that he ain't no Jesus. Because what did Jesus do? If Adam acted like Jesus, then in the moment she ate the fruit, he should have been begging God that the curse of death would fall on him while he was still innocent and didn't deserve it, so that she could live. That's our Jesus. While he was innocent without sin, he died for us. So I think it's setting up the contrast that we ain't no Jesus, Adam ain't no Jesus. We need a greater father figure than Adam, is what I think is being established in the garden. It doesn't have us look to Adam for our answers. It has us looking for something greater. And that becomes a wonderful Bible study, because you'll see even the greats like Abraham and Joseph and David are always doing something that leaves you wanting a greater king or a greater founding father. They're always They always leave you somehow unsatisfied with their life, even if they had a great, great, great life that's being celebrated. And Jesus will come and he'll say things like, one greater than Solomon is here, or a prophet greater than Jonah is here. He's trying to get you off of all of your Old Testament heroes and say they were just pointing to me. So somehow, some way they're pointing to me. And Jesus doesn't have those disappointments in him. He doesn't fail like Adam or David or Joseph or any of them. So, and people say, well, I know David's failure, Bathsheba. I know Adam's failure, eating the fruit. I know Abraham's failure, saying to the king, this is my sister, not my wife, and all those things. But Joseph's failure was kind of hard to see. But Joseph's failure was with Potiphar's wife. And you'll say, he didn't fail with Potiphar's wife. He actually ran from Potiphar's wife. Well, when you read Proverbs, you'll see that Solomon's wisdom is when you come across the adulterous woman, you're to flee her, right? And now you're saying you're not making your point very well because he did flee her. He actually followed Solomon's wisdom and he followed the proverb and he did what was right. But when Jesus comes along, you see something far greater, because a woman caught in the very act of adultery is thrown at Jesus' feet. Does he flee her like Proverbs tells him to do? No. He transforms the adulterous woman into the Proverbs 31 righteous woman who goes and sins no more. It's about transformation. Christianity is nothing if it's not about transforming people from what they were to what they're supposed to be. And there is no transformation in Joseph. When he left Potiphar's wife, she remained a woman with an adulterous heart that lied about him to get him killed. That is not how we leave people. So we need a better Joseph figure. So, gosh, I have no idea why I'm saying all this right now. I hope it answered the question somehow, some way. Sorry about that.
As always, thank you, Bill. So we're just due to time, we're going to end with this last question here that has to do with early in the Bible. As Christians, how do we go explaining the extraordinarily long lives of people early in the book of Genesis?
Yeah, well, you see that what we call the antediluvian folks, those are the folks before the flood. They certainly live. You see them in Genesis 5. They're living anywhere between 600 to 900 years. But you see God tell Noah as he's building the ark, he says he's going to reduce the years of man to 120 area. And the reason why he would do that, I think, is obvious, is that when you let human beings live 6, 7, and 8, 900 years, what is the story that was told of that group? Well, Genesis 6 says their thoughts were only evil continuously. So imagine the sin that you would pile up with all those centuries under your belt. So I think in limiting our lives, it's a big, huge act of grace, quite frankly. The other thing is this. What do we know from Genesis before the flood? There's some sort of difference in the atmosphere. Water's above, water's below. There's some sort of, many scholars believe there's a water canopy over the earth. And that water canopy was part of the flood that had collapsed and caused the rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And if there was a water canopy around the earth, then what would we know about the sun shining through a water canopy? We know that would be a greenhouse effect. And what would a greenhouse effect be? Well, number one, the reason why we age is because of the sun's effect on our cells. It ages our cells very rapidly. Well, with that water canopy greenhouse effect, it would be slowed down tremendously. And that would allow them to live longer. Another thing is, as human life progresses, obviously disease increases and things like that. They would, what disease would Adam and Eve have? What would they catch? Type of thing. You need a germ to have a cold. So, they were living free from a lot of that stuff. The other thing is this. The first command God ever gave was, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. You got to give people time to pull that one off. That's a huge task. So they're going to have long lives and have many, many generations of kids within them to do that. And so I think there's multiple reasons to look at why they live so long, and then why after the flood you don't see them living that long at all. And God even stating that they won't live that long after the flood because of sin.
Great, thank you, Pastor Bill. We had one other question come in that had to do with aliens. So if you don't mind us touching on that before we call it a night, the question says, could the so-called aliens be the sons of men or the Nephilims mentioned in Genesis chapter 6?
I would not think they were beings from another planet. I do think they were fallen angels, though, but I wouldn't call fallen angels aliens. Nephilim in Hebrew literally means fallen ones. So they're ones that have fallen from grace. So I wouldn't attribute that to alien life, extraterrestrial, some other planet. I think it's clearly spiritual, demonic even. And so therefore, when they reproduce with the women of the earth, it's literally half demonic children being raised up, which now makes total sense that God would say their thoughts are only evil continuously, because look at the source type of thing. So to me, all the pieces fit together with the Nephilim being fallen angels. But no, I wouldn't attribute it to alien life at all.